Millionaire said she could never be a mom. 15 years later, she crashed his wedding with his twins. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Laura Martinez had built her life on one devastating lie. At 20 years old, she had been told she could never have children. The man she loved, Christopher Moore, had shattered her heart with his cruel rejection, leaving her broken and alone. But 15 years later, as she stood at the back of an elegant church with her twin sons, she was about to shatter his world in return. The groom turned at the sound of a child's voice calling "Mom!" and froze. Two boys stood beside a woman he had never expected to see again. The resemblance was unmistakable, undeniable. Christopher Moore was staring at his own sons, the heirs he had always wanted, the family he had destroyed with his own hands. The wedding was about to become a reckoning. "Mom, do we really have to wear these fancy clothes?" 15-year-old Alex Martinez tugged at his navy blazer, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made Laura's heart ache with recognition. "Just for a few hours, sweetheart," Laura replied, adjusting his collar with practiced maternal efficiency. "This is a very important client, and I need you both to look presentable." Leo, Alex's identical twin, rolled his eyes as he straightened his tie. "Why could not we just stay home and play video games like normal kids?" "Because normal kids do not have mothers who are trying to land the biggest interior design contract of their careers," Laura said, though her tone remained gentle. At 35, she had learned to balance firmness with understanding, especially when it came to her sons. The three of them stood in the foyer of their modest but beautifully decorated home in Riverside, California. Laura had purchased the house 5 years ago when her interior design business, Serenity Spaces, had finally become profitable enough to afford the mortgage. Every room reflected her aesthetic vision and her determination to create a warm, stable environment for her boys. "Tell us again why we have to come with you," Alex said, though his complaint lacked real conviction. Both boys had grown accustomed to accompanying their mother to client meetings when necessary, particularly during school breaks. "Because Mrs. Henderson cancelled at the last minute and I could not find another babysitter," Laura explained, gathering her portfolio and car keys. "Besides, you are both old enough to behave yourselves for a few hours while I handle the final preparations." The client had been unusually secretive about the details, communicating primarily through an assistant who had provided only the venue address and a substantial down payment. Laura had been told simply that it was a high-profile wedding, requiring extensive floral arrangements and decorative touches for both the ceremony and reception. The fee was more than she typically earned in 3 months. "What if the people there are really boring?" Leo asked, pushing his hair back in a gesture that mirrored his brother's exactly. "Then you will sit quietly and read the books I packed for you," Laura said, though she smiled at his dramatic expression. "Or you can help me with the flower arrangements. Some of the guests might even be interesting." As they walked to her Honda Pilot, Laura felt the familiar tug of maternal pride mixed with something deeper and more complicated. Her sons were growing up so quickly, their voices beginning to deepen, their shoulders broadening. Soon they would be men, and she wondered if she had prepared them adequately for the world beyond their small family unit. "Mom, are you nervous about this job?" Alex asked as they buckled their seatbelts. Laura paused, considering her answer. She had taught her sons to be honest about their feelings, but she also tried not to burden them with her adult concerns. "A little," she admitted. "It is a very important opportunity for the business." "You always do amazing work," Leo said loyally. "Remember that wedding last year where the bride cried when she saw the flowers?" "That was different," Laura replied, starting the engine. "That was a smaller event, and I knew the family personally." The drive to the venue took nearly an hour, Winding through some of the most affluent neighborhoods in Southern California, Laura had grown up in these areas, though in far more modest circumstances. Her own family had been solidly middle class, her father a high school teacher and her mother a nurse. They had given her a foundation of values and work ethic that had served her well through the challenges of single motherhood. "Look at the size of these houses," Alex marveled, pressing his face to the window. "Money does not automatically mean happiness," Laura said automatically, though she felt a familiar pang of financial anxiety. Despite her success, she still worried about providing for her sons' futures, about college funds and unexpected expenses. "But it probably does not hurt," Leo observed, with the pragmatic wisdom of a 15-year-old. Laura laughed despite herself. "No, it probably does not hurt." The GPS directed them to an address that turned out to be a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and a circular driveway. Laura had seen pictures of the venue during her initial consultation, but the reality was even more impressive. The property spoke of old money and established social position, the kind of wealth that had been carefully maintained across generations. "Whoa!" both boys said in unison, their usual teenage nonchalance temporarily forgotten. "Remember what we discussed about appropriate behavior," Laura said, though she was equally impressed by the grandeur of the setting. They parked near the service entrance, where several other vendors were unloading supplies. Laura recognized the caterer, a woman she had worked with before on smaller events. The florist was someone new, a young man who looked slightly overwhelmed by the scale of his assignment. "Mrs. Martinez." A woman in her 50s approached them, clipboard in hand and stress evident in her expression. "I am Patricia Williams, the event coordinator. Thank you so much for coming early." "Of course," Laura replied, shaking the woman's hand. "These are my sons, Alex and Leo. I hope you do not mind that they are here." "Not at all," Patricia said, though she barely glanced at the boys. "We have several last-minute changes to discuss, and I am afraid the timeline is quite compressed." As they walked toward the main house, Laura felt a strange sense of unease that she could not quite identify. The feeling was not entirely unfamiliar, but it was stronger than her usual pre-event nervousness. She attributed it to the pressure of such a high-profile assignment and the substantial fee that depended on her success. The next few hours would determine whether Serenity Spaces could expand to the next level of clientele, whether her sons would have the financial security she had always dreamed of providing them. Laura Martinez had built her life on determination and hard work, but she had no idea that she was about to walk into the one situation that would test every foundation she had carefully constructed. The estate's interior was even more impressive than its exterior, with soaring ceilings, original oil paintings, and furniture that spoke of both quality and restraint. Laura found herself automatically cataloguing design elements, her professional eye noting the careful balance of traditional elegance with contemporary comfort. "The ceremony will take place in the garden pavilion," Patricia explained as they walked through the main hall. "The reception will be in the ballroom, but we also need decorative touches throughout the house since guests will be arriving early for cocktails." Alex and Leo followed silently, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by the slightly overwhelmed quiet that often accompanied them in unfamiliar, informal settings. Laura had taught them to observe and learn from new environments, but she could see that the scale of this event was beyond anything they had previously experienced. "How many guests are expected?" Laura asked, making notes in her leather portfolio. 250 for the ceremony, 300 for the reception, Patricia replied. "The guest list includes several prominent business leaders and their families, so everything must be absolutely perfect." They paused in what appeared to be a library, its walls lined with leather-bound books and family photographs. Laura's attention was drawn to the pictures, noting the formal poses and expensive clothing that suggested generations of wealth and social prominence. "The groom's family has been very specific about their expectations," Patricia continued. "They have requested white roses and peonies for the ceremony, with touches of pale gold for the reception. Nothing too elaborate, but everything must be sophisticated and timeless." "That sounds beautiful," Laura said, though she felt another flutter of that inexplicable unease. "Have I met the bride and groom?" "I do not believe I have had a chance to speak with them directly. They have been quite busy with other preparations," Patricia said quickly. "The groom is handling some last-minute business matters, and the bride is at her final dress fitting. They have complete confidence in your reputation and previous work." As they moved toward the garden pavilion, Laura caught sight of the catering staff setting up tables and arranging linens. The level of preparation was extraordinary, clearly representing a significant financial investment. She wondered about the young couple who could afford such an elaborate celebration and whether they truly understood the commitment they were making to each other. "Mom, look at that fountain," Leo whispered, pointing to an ornate stone structure surrounded by carefully maintained flower beds. "It is beautiful," Laura agreed, though she was focused on the logistics of her floral arrangements. "We will need to coordinate the colors carefully to complement the existing landscaping." The garden pavilion was a masterpiece of architectural design, with white columns and a peaked roof that provided an elegant framework for the ceremony. Laura could immediately envision the flower arrangements that would enhance the natural beauty of the setting without overwhelming it. "The ceremony is scheduled for 4 o'clock this afternoon," Patricia said, checking her watch. "The bridal party will process from the house, and the groom will be waiting here with the officiant." "This afternoon?" Laura looked up from her notes in surprise. "I thought I was here to prepare for an event next weekend." "Did no one tell you?" Patricia's expression tightened with stress. "The ceremony is today. We have been working around the clock to accommodate a change in the timeline." Laura felt a moment of panic. She had brought enough flowers for preliminary arrangements, but not for a complete wedding setup. "I am not sure I have sufficient supplies for a full wedding today. The additional flowers were delivered this morning," Patricia said, leading them toward a service area where Laura could see boxes of white roses and peonies. "We took the liberty of ordering based on your previous specifications." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Laura worked with practiced efficiency to create the arrangements she had envisioned. Alex and Leo helped by carrying flowers and holding containers, their earlier complaints forgotten in the face of their mother's obvious stress. As she worked, Laura found herself thinking about the couple who would be married in this beautiful setting. She had always felt a personal investment in the weddings she decorated, imagining the joy and hope that would fill the space she helped create. Today, however, she felt oddly disconnected from that emotional resonance. "The guests should be arriving within the hour," Patricia announced, appearing at Laura's elbow with her ever-present clipboard. "How are we progressing?" "Nearly finished," Laura replied, stepping back to survey her work. The arrangements were some of her best, elegant and romantic, without being overly elaborate. "I just need to place the final touches on the altar arrangements." "Excellent," Patricia said, though her expression remained tense. "The photographer will want to take pictures of the decorations before the guests arrive." As Laura made the final adjustments to the flowers, she noticed other staff members moving with increased urgency. The string quartet had arrived and was setting up in a corner of the pavilion, their music stands positioned to provide a perfect acoustic backdrop for the ceremony. "Mom, do you think we will get to see the wedding?" Alex asked quietly, not wanting to interrupt her concentration. "Probably not," Laura replied, though she felt a twinge of disappointment. "We will likely be busy with reception preparations during the ceremony." "That is kind of sad," Leo observed. "You do all this work to make things beautiful, but you never get to see people enjoy it." Laura paused in her work, struck by her son's observation. He was right, of course. She had decorated dozens of weddings and celebrations, but she rarely witnessed the joy and celebration that her efforts helped create. Today, for some reason, that reality felt particularly poignant. Sometimes the satisfaction comes from knowing you have helped make someone's special day perfect, she said, though she wondered if she was trying to convince herself as much as her sons. The sound of cars arriving in the circular driveway indicated that the guests were beginning to arrive. Laura could hear voices and laughter drifting from the front of the house, the excitement and anticipation that always accompanied such celebrations. "Should we go set up the reception area now?" Alex asked, clearly eager to move to a new location. "In a few minutes," Laura said, making one final adjustment to the bridal bouquet she had created. "I want to make sure everything here is perfect first." As she worked, Laura had no idea that she was about to face the most challenging moment of her life, that the beautiful wedding she had helped create would soon become the setting for a confrontation that would change everything for her small family. The guests began arriving in waves, their expensive cars creating a parade of luxury vehicles along the circular driveway. Laura watched from the service entrance as men in tailored suits and women in designer dresses made their way toward the garden pavilion, their conversations punctuated by the kind of laughter that came with comfort and privilege. "Look at that dress," Leo whispered, pointing to a woman in an emerald green gown that probably cost more than Laura's monthly mortgage payment. "Remember what we discussed about staring?" Laura reminded him gently, though she was equally fascinated by the display of wealth and social status surrounding them. Patricia appeared at her elbow, somehow managing to look even more stressed than before. "The bride is having a minor crisis with her veil, and the groom seems to have disappeared for a phone call. Can you make sure the altar arrangements are absolutely perfect?" "Of course," Laura replied, though she wondered what kind of business emergency could not wait until after a man's wedding ceremony. They made their way back to the garden pavilion, where the guests were beginning to take their seats. Laura noticed that the men carried themselves with a particular confidence that came from generations of financial security, while the women displayed the kind of polished elegance that required both money and education to achieve. "The flowers look amazing, Mom," Alex said quietly as they approached the altar area. "Thank you, sweetheart," Laura replied, though she was focused on ensuring that every detail was perfect. The white roses and peonies created exactly the romantic atmosphere she had envisioned, enhanced by the golden afternoon light filtering through the pavilion's columns. As she made final adjustments to the arrangements, Laura became aware of conversations among the guests, fragments of discussion about business deals, vacation homes, and social events. This was clearly a world where money was not a consideration, where decisions were made based on preference rather than necessity. "I hear Christopher finally decided to settle down," she heard one woman say to another. "It is about time, considering he is already 35. Laura felt a strange chill at the mention of the groom's name and age, but she told herself it was simply coincidence. Christopher was not an uncommon name, and there were many men of that age who might be getting married in such circumstances. "The bride is quite young," the second woman replied. 26, I believe. From the Richmond family in San Francisco." "Good breeding," the first woman said approvingly, "and she will be able to give him children, which is obviously important for carrying on the family name." Laura's hands stilled on the flowers she was arranging. The casual reference to children and family legacy brought back memories she had spent years trying to suppress. Conversations about inheritance and heirs that had once included her own dreams and hopes. "Excuse me," a man's voice said behind her. "Are you the florist?" Laura turned to find a distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly styled and his manner radiating the kind of authority that came with significant wealth and social position. "I am Laura Martinez," she replied, extending her hand. "I am responsible for the floral arrangements." "Robert Moore," he said, shaking her hand with the firm grip of a man accustomed to making important deals. "I am the father of the groom. I wanted to personally thank you for the beautiful work." Laura felt the world tilt slightly around her. Moore. The name she had spent 15 years trying to forget. The name that belonged to the man who had broken her heart and destroyed her faith in love. "Thank you," she managed to say, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I am pleased that you are satisfied with the arrangements." "Christopher will be very happy," Robert Moore continued, apparently unaware of Laura's internal turmoil. "He has been quite particular about the details, wanting everything to be perfect for his new wife." Christopher Moore, the man who had told her she was useless because she could not give him children, the man who had struck her and abandoned her when she needed him most, the man who was about to marry another woman in the garden pavilion that Laura had spent the morning decorating. "Mom, are you okay?" Alex appeared at her elbow, his expression concerned. "You look really pale." "I am fine," Laura said automatically, though she felt anything but fine. Her heart was racing and her hands were trembling slightly. "Just a little tired from the preparations." Robert Moore glanced at Alex with casual interest, then did a double take that Laura caught immediately. His expression shifted from polite acknowledgement to something approaching shock as he took in Alex's features, the dark hair and strong jawline that so clearly resembled his own family. "This is my son Alex," Laura said, her voice carefully controlled. "And this is Leo," she added as the second twin joined them. Robert Moore stared at both boys with an expression that suggested he was seeing something impossible. His gaze moved between the twins and then back to Laura, his businessman's mind clearly working to process information that did not fit his expectations. "How old are your boys?" he asked quietly. 15, Laura replied, meeting his gaze directly. "They will be 16 in November." The calculation was immediate and obvious. Robert Moore's face went pale as he realized the implications of what he was seeing. Two 15-year-old boys who looked remarkably like his own son, accompanied by a woman whose name he might have heard mentioned in the past. "Laura Martinez," he repeated slowly, as if testing the sound of her name. "Have we met before?" "No," Laura said simply. "We have not met." But even as she spoke, she could see the recognition dawning in his eyes. The understanding that the woman standing before him was not simply the florist hired to decorate his son's wedding, but someone whose presence represented a complication that could destroy everything he had planned for this day. The sound of the string quartet beginning to play the processional music filled the pavilion, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Laura realized that she had perhaps minutes before Christopher Moore would walk down the aisle to marry another woman, unaware that his own sons were standing just a few feet away. The music swelled as the wedding party began to assemble, and Laura felt as if she were trapped in a dream that was rapidly becoming a nightmare. She needed to leave, to take her sons and disappear before Christopher saw them, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground. "Mom, what is wrong?" Leo asked, his voice filled with concern as he noticed her obvious distress. "Nothing, sweetheart," Laura said, though her voice was barely above a whisper. "We should go check on the reception arrangements." "The service is about to begin," Robert Moore said, his voice strained. "Perhaps you should stay to ensure everything goes smoothly with the flowers." Laura understood that his suggestion was really a command, that he wanted her to remain where he could keep an eye on her and the boys. She also understood that he was trying to process the implications of their presence, to determine how much danger they represented to his family's plans. The guests had settled into their seats, their conversations diminishing to a respectful murmur as the officiant took his position at the altar. Laura found herself scanning the crowd, recognizing the faces of wealth and privilege that represented Christopher's world. "There is the bride," Alex whispered, pointing toward the house where a young woman in an elaborate white dress was preparing to make her entrance. The bride was indeed beautiful, with the kind of delicate features and perfect grooming that suggested both good genetics and expensive care. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world, never questioned whether she deserved the life she had been born into. Laura felt a complex mixture of emotions as she watched the young woman prepare for her walk down the aisle. There was envy, certainly, for the security and certainty that this woman represented, but there was also something approaching pity, because Laura knew what kind of man Christopher Moore really was beneath his charming exterior. "Where is the groom?" Leo asked, looking around the pavilion. "He should be arriving any moment," Patricia said, appearing beside them with her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. "He was handling some last-minute business matters." As if summoned by her words, Christopher Moore emerged from the house, walking with the confident stride that Laura remembered all too well. He was older now, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his face showing the lines that came with 15 years of business success and social responsibility. He was also, Laura realized with a painful jolt of recognition, even more handsome than he had been in his youth. The years had given him a gravitas and presence that made him seem larger than life, the kind of man who commanded attention simply by entering a room. "Oh," Alex said quietly, and Laura realized that her son was seeing his father for the first time. Christopher moved toward the altar with easy confidence, nodding to guests and smiling at his bride. He appeared to be exactly what he was, a successful businessman about to marry a suitable woman in front of the people who mattered most to his social and professional life. Laura felt 15 years of carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. She had built her life around the assumption that she would never see Christopher Moore again, that he would remain a painful memory rather than a living presence. The reality of his physical proximity was overwhelming. "Mom, you're shaking," Leo said, taking her hand. "What is wrong?" "I am fine," Laura said, though they both knew she was lying. "Just nervous about the arrangements." Christopher had reached the altar and was speaking quietly with the officiant, his manner relaxed and confident. He looked like a man who had never questioned his right to happiness, never doubted that life would give him exactly what he wanted. The processional music began in earnest, and the guests rose to their feet as the bridal party began their walk down the aisle. Laura found herself unable to move, unable to look away from the man who had changed the course of her entire life with his cruelty and rejection. "We should go," she whispered to her sons, but her voice lacked conviction. "The flowers are so beautiful," Alex said, apparently unaware of his mother's emotional turmoil. "Look how the light is hitting the roses." Laura looked at the arrangement she had created, the white roses and peonies that would serve as a backdrop for Christopher's marriage to another woman. She had spent the morning creating beauty for the man who had told her she was worthless, who had struck her and abandoned her when she needed him most. The bride began her walk down the aisle, her dress rustling softly against the flower petals that had been scattered along the path. She was radiant with happiness and confidence, clearly a woman who had never doubted that she deserved the fairy tale ending she was about to receive. Christopher watched his bride approach with a smile that Laura remembered from their own relationship, the expression of a man who was pleased with his choice and confident in his decision. He had no idea that the woman he had destroyed 15 years ago was standing just a few feet away, watching him claim the happiness he had denied her. The ceremony began with traditional words about love and commitment, promises that Laura had once believed Christopher would make to her. As the officiant spoke about the sacred bond of marriage, Laura felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Mom," Leo whispered, "are you crying?" "Just moved by how beautiful everything looks," Laura said, though she knew her sons were not fooled by her explanation. The bride and groom exchanged vows, their voices carrying clearly through the pavilion. Christopher's words were perfect, expressing devotion and commitment in language that sounded both sincere and rehearsed. Laura wondered if he truly meant what he was saying, or if he was simply performing the role that was expected of him. As the ceremony reached its climax, Laura realized that she was about to witness Christopher Moore kiss another woman and be pronounced husband and wife. The man who had destroyed her life was about to achieve perfect happiness with someone else, someone who could give him the children and social position he had always wanted. The decision formed in her mind without conscious thought. She was not going to run. She was not going to disappear quietly and allow Christopher to believe that his past actions had no consequences. For the first time in 15 years, Laura Martinez was going to stand her ground. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced, and the garden pavilion erupted in applause as Christopher Moore claimed his new wife with a kiss that was both passionate and appropriately restrained for the audience. Laura felt something break inside her chest as she watched the man who had once promised to love her forever seal his commitment to another woman. The pain was sharper than she had expected, carrying with it 15 years of suppressed grief and anger. "They look happy," Alex observed, clapping along with the rest of the guests. "Yes," Laura said quietly. "They do." The newlyweds began their walk back down the aisle, Christopher's arm around his wife's waist as they smiled at their guests. Laura noticed how he carried himself with the satisfaction of a man who had achieved exactly what he set out to accomplish. "Congratulations," she heard guests calling out, their voices filled with genuine warmth and celebration. "Beautiful ceremony. Perfect couple. So happy for you both." Christopher paused to shake hands and accept embraces from family members and close friends, his new wife glowing beside him with the radiance of a woman who had never doubted her worthiness of such happiness. "Mom, are we supposed to stay for the reception?" Leo asked, tugging at her sleeve. "I am not sure," Laura replied, though she knew they should leave immediately. Every instinct told her to gather her sons and drive away before Christopher noticed their presence, before the carefully constructed life she had built could be destroyed by this unexpected encounter. "The reception line will form on the terrace," Patricia announced, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Guests are welcome to offer their congratulations to the happy couple." Laura watched as people began moving toward the house, their conversations animated with the joy and excitement that always followed a successful wedding ceremony. She noticed how naturally Christopher moved through the crowd, how easily he accepted the congratulations and well wishes of his social circle. "We should go," she said to her sons, finally finding her voice. "Our work here is finished." "But do not you want to see how people react to your decorations?" Alex asked. "You always like to see the final result." Before Laura could respond, she heard Christopher's voice rising above the general conversation, thanking someone for their attendance and expressing his happiness about the day. The sound of his voice, so familiar and yet changed by the years, sent a chill through her entire body. "Mom, you really do not look well," Leo said, his concern evident. "Maybe we should sit down for a minute." "I am fine," Laura insisted, though she felt anything but fine. Her heart was racing, her palms were sweating, and she felt as if she might faint from the emotional overload of seeing Christopher again. "Laura." Robert Moore appeared beside them again, his expression troubled. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "I do not think that would be appropriate," Laura replied, instinctively moving closer to her sons. "We should be leaving soon." "Please," Robert said, his voice carrying a note of desperation that surprised her. "Just for a few minutes. It is important." Laura looked at her sons, both of whom were watching the exchange with growing curiosity. She realized that they were beginning to sense that something significant was happening, that their mother's distress was connected to more than simple professional nervousness. "Boys, why do not you go get something to drink from the refreshment table?" she suggested. "I will be right back." "Are you sure you are okay?" Alex asked, his protective instincts clearly engaged. "I am fine," Laura said, though she appreciated his concern. "Just a brief conversation about the arrangements." She followed Robert Moore to a quiet corner of the garden, away from the crowd of guests, but still within sight of her sons. The older man looked as if he had aged years in the past hour, his confident demeanor replaced by something approaching panic. "Those boys," he said without preamble, "they are Christopher's sons, are not they?" Laura met his gaze directly. "Yes." "My God," Robert said, running his hand through his silver hair. "Does he know?" "No," Laura replied. "He does not know they exist." "How is that possible?" Robert demanded. "How could he not know he has children?" Laura felt 15 years of carefully controlled anger beginning to surface. "Because when I told him I was supposedly infertile, he made it very clear that I was worthless to him, without the ability to produce heirs." Robert Moore stared at her, his businessman's mind obviously working to process the implications of her words. "He rejected you because you could not have children." "He did more than reject me," Laura said, her voice growing stronger. "He told me I was useless. He struck me. He threw me out of his life because I could not give him what he wanted. And then you discovered you were pregnant," Robert said, the pieces falling into place. 2 weeks after he threw me away," Laura confirmed. "The medical diagnosis was wrong. I was already pregnant with twins." Robert Moore looked across the garden toward the reception, where his son was celebrating his marriage with complete ignorance of the bombshell that was about to explode his carefully ordered life. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want nothing from you or your family," Laura said firmly. "I have built a good life for my sons without any help from the man who abandoned us." "Then why are you here?" Robert asked. "Why today, at his wedding?" Laura was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "I did not know it was his wedding when I accepted the job, but when I realized who the groom was, I decided to stay." "To cause trouble," Robert said, his voice carrying a note of accusation. "To show him what he lost," Laura replied with quiet dignity. "To let him see the children he claimed to want so desperately, the sons he never knew he had." The sound of laughter from the reception area reminded them both that Christopher's wedding celebration was continuing, that his new wife was probably wondering where her husband had disappeared to for his extended conversation. "This will destroy him," Robert said quietly. "He destroyed me 15 years ago," Laura replied. "Perhaps it is time for him to understand what that feels like." The reception was in full swing when Laura and her sons made their way toward the ballroom, the sound of conversation and laughter creating a backdrop of celebration that felt surreal, given the emotional upheaval Laura was experiencing. She had decided to stay, to face whatever consequences might come from Christopher's inevitable discovery of his son's existence. "The decorations in here are amazing too," Alex said, admiring the elaborate floral arrangements Laura had created for the reception. "You really outdid yourself, Mom." "Thank you," Laura replied, though she was scanning the crowd for Christopher, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The ballroom was filled with elegantly dressed guests, their conversations animated by champagne and the celebratory atmosphere of the successful wedding. Laura noticed how naturally her sons seemed to fit into the elegant setting, their good manners and natural confidence allowing them to navigate the social situation with ease. "There are the bride and groom," Leo said, pointing toward the head table where Christopher and his new wife were accepting congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers. Laura felt her breath catch as she got her first clear look at Christopher in the bright lights of the ballroom. He was indeed more handsome than ever, his success and maturity having given him a presence that was impossible to ignore. His new wife was beautiful beside him, her youth and obvious happiness creating a perfect picture of wedded bliss. "They do look happy together," Alex observed, apparently unaware of his mother's emotional turmoil. "Yes," Laura said quietly, though the word felt like broken glass in her throat. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne glasses, offering them to Laura and her sons. "Sparkling cider for the young men," he suggested with a professional smile. "That would be lovely," Laura replied, accepting a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. As they stood near the edge of the dance floor, Laura noticed other guests beginning to take notice of her sons. She could see the double takes, the whispered conversations, the growing awareness that something was not quite right about the presence of these two teenage boys who bore such a striking resemblance to the groom. "Mom, people are staring at us," Leo said quietly, his discomfort evident. "It is probably because you both look so handsome in your suits," Laura said, though she knew the real reason for the attention they were receiving. The band began playing, and Christopher led his new wife onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. Laura watched them move together, noting how gracefully Christopher danced, how tenderly he held his bride. The sight filled her with a complex mixture of emotions she could not fully identify. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said behind them. "I do not believe we have met. I am Margaret Richmond, the bride's mother." Laura turned to find an elegantly dressed woman in her early 50s, her expression polite but curious. "Laura Martinez," she replied, shaking the woman's hand. "I am responsible for the floral arrangements. They are absolutely beautiful," Margaret said, though her attention was clearly focused on Alex and Leo. "And these are your sons?" "Yes," Laura said, instinctively moving closer to the boys. "Alex and Leo." Margaret's gaze moved between the twins and the dance floor, where Christopher was spinning his new wife in a graceful turn. The resemblance was impossible to ignore, and Laura could see the woman's mind working to process what she was seeing. "How old are your boys?" Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. 15, Laura replied, meeting the woman's gaze directly. The calculation was immediate and obvious. Margaret Richmond's expression shifted from polite curiosity to something approaching alarm as she realized the implications of what she was seeing. "I see," Margaret said quietly, her voice carrying a note of understanding that suggested she was not entirely surprised by this revelation. The first dance ended, and other couples began joining Christopher and his bride on the dance floor. Laura noticed that Christopher's father was making his way toward them, his expression grim with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. "Laura," Robert Moore said as he approached, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Perhaps we should continue our conversation somewhere more private." "I think we have said everything that needs to be said," Laura replied, though she could feel the tension building around them as more people began to notice the striking resemblance between her sons and the groom. "This is not the place for this discussion," Robert said urgently. "Please, think about what you are doing." "I am thinking about my sons," Laura said firmly. "For 15 years, I've protected them from the knowledge of what their father did to us, but they have a right to know who he is." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Alex asked, his confusion evident. "Who is our father?" Laura felt the moment of truth approaching, the point of no return that would change everything for her small family. She looked at her sons, these beautiful boys who had been her entire world for 15 years, and realized that she could no longer protect them from the complicated truth of their origins. "Alex, Leo," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen around them. "There is something I need to tell you about your father." The music continued to play, but Laura was aware that conversations around them had stopped. She could feel the weight of attention, the growing awareness that something significant was about to happen. "The man dancing with his bride," Laura said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "is Christopher Moore. He is your father." The silence that followed her words was complete and devastating. Laura could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the collective intake of breath from the people around them who had heard her announcement. On the dance floor, Christopher continued to dance with his wife, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. The reception continued around them, but Laura knew that within moments, the celebration would become something else entirely. Her sons stared at her with expressions of shock and confusion, trying to process the information she had just given them. Around them, the guests were beginning to whisper among themselves, the news spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Laura Martinez had finally played her hand, and there was no going back. Alex and Leo stared at their mother with identical expressions of shock, their faces pale beneath the elegant chandelier light. The whispers around them grew louder, creating a buzz of excitement and scandal that threatened to overwhelm the wedding celebration. "Our father," Leo repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That man is our father." "Why did you never tell us?" Alex demanded, his 15-year-old voice cracking with emotion. "Why did we have to find out like this?" Laura felt her heart breaking as she watched her sons process the revelation that would change their understanding of themselves and their family forever. She had always known this moment would come eventually, but she had imagined it happening in the privacy of their own home, not in front of hundreds of strangers at a wedding reception. "I wanted to protect you," she said, reaching for both boys. "I wanted to spare you the pain of knowing that he did not want us." "But he is right there," Alex said, pointing toward the dance floor where Christopher continued to move with his bride, still unaware of the drama unfolding around the edges of his reception. "He is right there, and he does not even know we exist." The crowd around them had grown larger, guests drawn by the obvious tension and the whispered rumors that were spreading through the ballroom. Laura could see cell phones being discreetly raised, social media posts being composed, the kind of scandal that would be discussed in certain circles for months to come. "Laura Martinez," Margaret Richmond said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet, "I think you need to leave immediately." "No," Laura said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I will not run away again. I did that once, and it solved nothing." Robert Moore stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "You are disrupting my son's wedding with your drama. This is neither the time nor the place for your personal grievances." Personal grievances. Laura felt 15 years of suppressed anger beginning to surface. Your son has 2 children he has never met, never supported, never acknowledged. These boys have spent their entire lives without a father because he decided I was worthless. The music stopped abruptly as the band became aware of the commotion near the dance floor. Christopher looked up from his bride, his expression confused as he noticed the crowd gathering and the obvious tension in the air. "What is happening?" he called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet ballroom. Laura felt her breath catch as Christopher's gaze swept the crowd, his eyes moving past her initially, then returning with a look of stunned recognition. She watched as his face went pale, as 15 years collapsed into a single moment of horrified understanding. "Laura," he said, her name falling from his lips like a prayer or a curse. His new wife looked between her husband and the woman who had just destroyed the perfection of her wedding day, her confusion evident in her beautiful face. "Christopher, who is that woman?" Christopher did not answer immediately, his gaze fixed on Laura with an intensity that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. She could see him processing her presence, trying to understand how the woman he had abandoned 15 years ago had materialized at his wedding reception. Then his eyes shifted to Alex and Leo, and Laura watched as understanding dawned with devastating clarity. The resemblance was unmistakable, the genetic connection undeniable. Christopher Moore was looking at two versions of himself, aged 15 years younger. "My God," he whispered, the words barely audible across the silent ballroom. His bride followed his gaze, her own face draining of color as she too recognized what everyone else in the room was seeing. The two teenage boys standing beside Laura Martinez were clearly Christopher's sons, a fact that raised immediate and uncomfortable questions about the timeline of their relationship. "Christopher," his wife said, her voice shaking, "what is happening?" Christopher seemed unable to speak, his gaze moving between Laura and the boys with an expression of complete shock. Laura could see him trying to calculate dates, trying to understand how this was possible, trying to process the reality that he had children he had never known existed. "Those are your sons," Laura said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Alex and Leo. They are 15 years old, and they have never had a father because you decided that a woman who could not give you children was worthless to you." The bride's gasp was audible throughout the ballroom, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized the implications of what she was hearing. Her perfect wedding day had just been revealed as something much more complicated. Her new husband exposed as a man with a secret past and abandoned children. "Christopher," she said, her voice barely controlled, "is this true?" Christopher finally found his voice, though it sounded strained and unfamiliar. "I thought you could not have children. The doctors said you were infertile." "The doctors were wrong," Laura replied, her voice steady despite the emotional chaos surrounding them. "I discovered I was pregnant 2 weeks after you threw me out of your life. 2 weeks after you told me I was useless and struck me for disappointing you." The collective gasp from the assembled guests was audible, the scandal growing more dramatic with each revelation. Laura could see people pulling out phones, could imagine the social media posts and gossip columns that would result from this public confrontation. Christopher's bride stared at her new husband with growing horror. "You struck her. You abandoned a pregnant woman?" "I did not know she was pregnant," Christopher said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I thought she could not have children." "So that made it acceptable to hit her?" the bride demanded, her voice rising with each word. "That made it acceptable to abandon someone you claimed to love?" Laura felt a surge of unexpected sympathy for the young woman whose wedding day had been destroyed by the revelation of her new husband's past. She had not intended to hurt an innocent person, but she had also not been able to remain silent when faced with Christopher's apparent happiness. "Mom," Alex said quietly, tugging at her sleeve, "can we go home now, please?" Laura looked at her son, seeing the confusion and pain in his eyes. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid, the moment when her children would be forced to confront the reality of their father's rejection and abandonment. "Yes," she said, putting her arms around both boys. "We can go home." "No," Christopher said, his voice stronger now, more like the commanding tone she remembered from their youth. "Do not leave. Not again." Laura turned to face him, seeing the man she had once loved desperately, the man who had broken her heart and changed the course of her entire life. He looked older, more sophisticated, but she could still see traces of the young man who had once promised to love her forever. "Why should I stay?" she asked. So you can reject us again? So you can tell your sons they are not good enough for your perfect life? I want to talk to them, Christopher said, his gaze moving to Alex and Leo. I want to meet my sons. The ballroom had erupted into chaos, with guests whispering among themselves and the bride's family huddled in what appeared to be an emergency conference. Laura could see the wedding photographer discreetly documenting the drama, the images that would become part of this family's history, whether they wanted them or not. You cannot just decide you want to meet them now, Laura said, her protective instincts fully engaged. You have had 15 years to wonder about what happened to me, 15 years to try to find me if you cared at all. I thought you could not have children, Christopher repeated, as if saying it enough times would make his past actions acceptable. Everything I did was based on that medical diagnosis. Everything you did was based on your own selfishness and cruelty, Laura shot back. You did not reject me because I was infertile. You rejected me because I could not give you what you wanted, when you wanted it exactly the way you wanted it. Alex and Leo stood between their parents, their faces reflecting the confusion and emotional overload of teenagers thrust into an adult situation they were not prepared to handle. Laura could see them, trying to process not just the identity of their father, but the circumstances of their conception and birth. Why did he hit you? Leo asked, his voice small and uncertain. Laura felt her heart break at the question. These were the conversations she had hoped to avoid, the ugly truths she had tried to shield her sons from understanding, because he was angry and disappointed and he took it out on me. That is not an excuse, Alex said, his voice harder than Laura had ever heard it. There is no excuse for hitting someone you are supposed to love. Christopher flinched at his son's words, the judgment clear in the teenager's voice. Laura could see him struggling to find a way to explain his past actions, to make himself appear sympathetic to the children he had never known existed. I was young, Christopher said finally. I made mistakes. Mistakes? Laura felt her carefully controlled composure beginning to crack. You called me worthless. You told me I was useless to you. You struck me and threw me out of your apartment. Those were not mistakes, Christopher. Those were choices. The bride had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, her perfect wedding day becoming a nightmare of revelation and recrimination. Laura could see her struggling to reconcile the man she had married with the man being described in this painful confrontation. I need some air, the bride said suddenly, her voice barely controlled. I need to get away from all of this. She pushed through the crowd of guests, her wedding dress trailing behind her as she fled toward the garden terrace. Christopher watched her go with an expression of panic, clearly torn between following his new wife and dealing with the sons he had just discovered. Go after her, Laura said quietly. Go salvage what you can of your wedding day. I cannot just leave, Christopher said, though his gaze was following his bride's retreat. I need to talk to the boys. No, Laura said firmly. You need to take care of your wife. You need to decide what kind of man you want to be in this situation. Robert Moore stepped forward, his expression grim with the realization that his son's perfect life was crumbling in real time. Christopher, go find Amanda. I will handle this situation. Christopher looked at his father, then at Laura and the boys, clearly struggling with the competing demands of his old life and his new one. Laura could see the calculation in his eyes, the same selfish consideration of his own interests that had driven his behavior 15 years ago. This is not over, he said finally, his voice carrying a note of warning or promise. I will not let you disappear again. We were never lost, Laura replied with quiet dignity. You just never bothered to look for us. Christopher turned and followed his bride toward the garden, leaving Laura and her sons standing in the middle of a ballroom full of shocked wedding guests. The whispers and stares continued, but Laura found herself feeling strangely liberated by the truth that had finally been spoken. "Mom," Alex said quietly, "can we really go home now?" "Yes," Laura said, gathering her purse and putting her arms around both boys. "We can go home." As they made their way toward the exit, Laura could hear the conversations resuming behind them, the analysis and speculation that would follow this dramatic revelation. She had accomplished what she had set out to do, whether consciously or not. Christopher Moore now knew that his actions had consequences, that the woman he had discarded had survived and thrived despite his cruelty. But as they reached the car, Laura realized that this confrontation was not an ending, but a beginning. Christopher had said he would not let them disappear again, and she believed him. The question was what he intended to do with that knowledge, and whether she was prepared for whatever came next. The drive home was quiet, both boys lost in thought as they processed the events of the day. Laura found herself thinking about the young woman whose wedding she had inadvertently destroyed, wondering if she would be able to forgive Christopher for the secrets he had kept from her. "Mom," Leo said finally, breaking the silence, "do you think he will try to contact us?" "I do not know," Laura said honestly. "But if he does, we will deal with it together." She had protected her sons for 15 years, and she would continue to protect them, whatever Christopher Moore decided to do with the knowledge of their existence. The confrontation at the wedding had been painful but necessary, a reckoning that had been 15 years in the making. Now they would go home and try to return to their normal lives, though Laura suspected that normal had just become a much more complicated concept for their small family. The next morning brought a deluge of phone calls and text messages that Laura had not anticipated. News of the wedding confrontation had spread through social media and local gossip networks with the speed and intensity of a wildfire, turning her private family drama into public entertainment. "Mom, there are 3 news vans parked outside," Alex called from the living room window, his voice filled with anxiety. "And people are taking pictures of our house." Laura set down her coffee cup and joined her son at the window, staring in disbelief at the media circus that had materialized overnight. Reporters with cameras and microphones were stationed on the sidewalk, clearly hoping for a statement or interview about the previous day's events. "This is insane," Leo said, peeking through the curtains. "Why do they care about our family?" "Because your father is a very wealthy and prominent businessman," Laura explained, though she was equally shocked by the level of attention. "And because the story of his abandoned children showing up at his wedding is exactly the kind of scandal that sells newspapers." Her phone buzzed with another text message, this one from a reporter offering a substantial sum for an exclusive interview. Laura deleted it without reading the full message, just as she had deleted the dozens of similar offers that had arrived since dawn. "Are we going to be prisoners in our own house?" Alex asked, his frustration evident. "No," Laura said firmly. "We are going to go about our normal lives and ignore the circus outside. This will die down in a few days when they find something else to obsess about." But even as she spoke, Laura was not entirely convinced of her own words. The story had all the elements that media outlets loved: wealth, scandal, abandoned children, and a dramatic public confrontation. She suspected the attention would continue for longer than she wanted to acknowledge. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by a series of sharp knocks. Laura ignored both, but the sounds continued with increasing persistence. "Mrs. Martinez," a woman's voice called through the door. "I am Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. Could we have just a few minutes of your time to discuss yesterday's events?" "Go away," Laura called back. though she knew the reporter would not give up easily. Her phone rang, the caller ID showing a number she did not recognize. Laura had stopped answering unknown calls after the 5th interview request, but this one felt different somehow. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Laura, this is Robert Moore. We need to talk." Laura felt her stomach tighten at the sound of Christopher's father's voice. She had expected this call, though she had hoped it would not come so quickly. "I do not think we have anything to discuss," she said. "The media attention is only going to get worse," Robert said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to controlling difficult situations. "We need to find a way to manage this situation before it destroys everyone involved." "By everyone, you mean your son and his new wife," Laura said. "You are not concerned about me or my children." "I am concerned about all of us," Robert replied, though Laura doubted his sincerity. "This scandal is not good for anyone. We need to find a way to make it go away." "The only way to make it go away is to tell the truth," Laura said. "Your son abandoned his pregnant girlfriend 15 years ago. That is the truth, and no amount of money or influence is going to change it." "What do you want?" Robert asked bluntly. "Money. A settlement. What will it take to make this quietly disappear?" Laura felt a surge of anger at the assumption that she could be bought off like a nuisance to be eliminated. "I want nothing from your family. I never have." "Then why did you reveal yourself at the wedding?" Robert demanded. "Why create this public spectacle if you do not want anything from us?" Laura was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. The truth was complicated, involving 15 years of pain and anger that she had never fully processed. "Because I wanted him to see what he had lost," she said finally. "I wanted him to understand that his actions had consequences, that the children he claimed to want so desperately were real people with real lives. And now that you have had your revenge, can we find a way to move forward?" Robert asked. "This was not revenge," Laura said. "This was truth." "There is a difference." Before Robert could respond, Laura heard a car door slam outside, followed by the sounds of the reporters rushing toward whoever had just arrived. She moved to the window and felt her heart skip a beat as she saw Christopher Moore walking up the front path, ignoring the shouted questions and camera flashes. "He is here," she said into the phone. "Who is where?" Robert asked. "Christopher. He is at my house." The line was quiet for a moment. "Laura, please be careful what you say to him. He is not thinking clearly right now." "Neither am I," Laura admitted, ending the call as Christopher's knock echoed through the house. Alex and Leo had both appeared in the living room, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Laura could see them trying to prepare themselves for their first real conversation with the father they had just learned existed. "Should we answer it?" Leo asked quietly. Laura looked at her sons, these young men she had raised alone for 15 years, and realized that this moment had been inevitable from the instant she had decided to reveal Christopher's identity at the wedding. They deserved the chance to meet their father, to ask their questions and form their own opinions about the man who had shaped their lives through his absence. "Yes," she said, smoothing her hair and checking her appearance in the hallway mirror. "We should answer it." The reporters surged forward as Laura opened the door, their cameras and microphones thrust toward her face. But her attention was focused entirely on Christopher, who stood on her doorstep looking haggard and exhausted, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "We need to talk," he said simply. "Come in," Laura replied, stepping aside to let him enter while carefully blocking the reporter's view of her sons. Christopher stepped into the house he had never seen, the home where his children had grown up without him. Laura watched his eyes take in the family photographs on the walls, the evidence of 15 years of birthdays and school events and ordinary moments that he had missed. "Boys," Laura said, closing the door firmly behind Christopher. "This is your father." The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of questions and answers, with the weight of a relationship that was beginning at the most complicated possible moment. Laura could see Christopher struggling with what to say, how to begin a conversation with children who were strangers to him, but who carried his genetic legacy in their faces. "Hello," Alex said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Hello," Christopher replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You look like your mother." "People say we look like you," Leo said, his tone carrying a note of challenge. Christopher studied both boys, and Laura could see him recognizing himself in their features, in the way they carried themselves, in the defensive posture they had adopted in the face of this unprecedented situation. "Yes," he said quietly. "You do." The awkwardness of the moment was overwhelming, but Laura knew it was necessary. These three people needed to find a way to relate to each other, to build some kind of relationship from the ruins of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Christopher sat on the edge of Laura's sofa, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the modest living room that was so different from the world of wealth and privilege he inhabited. Alex and Leo had positioned themselves across from him, their body language defensive but curious. "Your mother tells me you are both 15, Christopher said, his voice tentative as he attempted to begin what was clearly the most difficult conversation of his life. "We turn 16 in November, Alex replied, his tone carefully neutral. "November 15th. Laura watched Christopher do the mental calculation, figuring out the timeline of their conception and birth. She could see the moment when he realized that she had been pregnant during their last argument, that she had been carrying his children when he struck her and cast her aside. "I am sorry," he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised Laura and the boys. "I am sorry for what I did to your mother, and I am sorry for not being part of your lives." "You did not know we existed," Leo said, though his voice carried a note of skepticism. "Mom says you thought she could not have children." "That is true," Christopher said, looking at Laura with an expression she could not quite read. "But that does not excuse how I treated her. I was cruel and selfish, and I have regretted my actions for 15 years. Laura felt a flash of surprise at this admission. She had expected defensiveness and justification, not genuine remorse. "You have regretted it?" she asked. "Every day," Christopher said, meeting her gaze directly. "I have thought about you every day for 15 years, wondering where you were, how you were, whether you were happy." "But you never tried to find me," Laura pointed out. "I thought you would not want to see me," Christopher replied. "I thought I had destroyed any chance of your forgiveness with my behavior." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Christopher's phone ringing. He glanced at the screen and sighed heavily before declining the call. "Your wife?" Laura asked. "Amanda," Christopher confirmed. "She has been calling all morning. She wants to talk about what happened yesterday." "What did happen yesterday?" Alex asked. "I mean, after we left?" Christopher ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Laura remembered from their youth. "The wedding reception ended early. Amanda was upset, understandably. Her family was mortified by the scene." "What about your family?" Leo asked. "What did they think about finding out they had grandchildren?" "My father is trying to manage the situation," Christopher said diplomatically. "He is concerned about the media attention and the impact on the family's reputation." "And you?" Laura asked. "What are you concerned about?" Christopher looked at her for a long moment, then at his sons. "I am concerned about getting to know my children. I'm concerned about making up for 15 years of absence. I'm concerned about proving that I am not the same man who hurt you so badly." "People do not just change," Alex said, his voice carrying a wisdom beyond his years, "not without a reason." "You are right," Christopher agreed. I started changing the day I realized what I had lost. It just took me 15 years to understand how much I had lost. Laura felt herself struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe that Christopher had genuinely changed, that he had grown from the selfish young man who had broken her heart. But another part of her remembered the pain and humiliation of his rejection, the years of struggling alone while he built his fortune and reputation. "What do you want from us?" she asked directly. "I want to be part of their lives," Christopher said, looking at Alex and Leo. "I want to be their father if they will let me." "You cannot just show up and expect to be a father," Leo said, his voice carrying the same defensive tone Laura had heard from him when he felt threatened. "You cannot just decide you want us now." "You are right," Christopher said. "I cannot expect anything. I can only ask for the chance to try." The phone rang again, and this time Christopher answered it. "Amanda, I cannot talk right now. I will call you later." Laura could hear the sound of a woman's voice through the phone, high-pitched with emotion and stress. Christopher's expression grew increasingly troubled as he listened. "No, I am not coming home right now," he said finally. "This is important. This is my children we are talking about." He ended the call and looked at Laura with an expression of frustration and conflict. "She wants me to choose between her and you. Between my new life and my past? Maybe you should go to her," Laura suggested, though the words felt strange in her mouth. "She is your wife. You made a commitment to her yesterday." "I made a commitment to you 15 years ago," Christopher said quietly. "I broke that commitment, and I have been paying for it ever since." The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Laura could see Alex and Leo processing this information, trying to understand the adult emotions and complicated history that had shaped their existence. "What does that mean?" Alex asked. "Are you saying you still love Mom?" The question hung in the air, creating a tension that none of them were prepared to address. Laura felt her heart racing as she waited for Christopher's answer, realizing that she cared more about his response than she wanted to admit. "I never stopped loving your mother," Christopher said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "That is why I could never find anyone who measured up to her. That is why every relationship I have had has felt like a poor substitute for what we had together." Laura felt tears prick her eyes at his confession. After 15 years of assuming that Christopher had moved on easily, that he had found someone better to replace her, the knowledge that he had carried their relationship with him was both painful and healing. "Then why did you marry someone else?" Leo asked, his voice small and confused. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with how to explain his actions to his teenage sons. "Because I thought I could never have what I really wanted. Because I thought I had to settle for something less than what I had lost." The conversation was becoming too intense, too emotionally charged for the boys to process comfortably. Laura could see them looking back and forth between their parents, trying to understand the complex adult emotions that were being revealed. "I think we all need some time to process this," she said gently. "This is a lot of information for everyone to absorb." Christopher nodded, though he seemed reluctant to leave. "Can I see them again? Can we have dinner sometime? Or go to a movie? I want to get to know them." Laura looked at her sons, seeing the confusion and curiosity in their faces. They deserved the chance to form their own relationship with their father, whatever that might look like. "We can discuss it," she said carefully. "But this has to be about what is best for Alex and Leo, not about what any of the adults want." "Of course," Christopher agreed. "Everything I do from now on will be about what is best for them." As he prepared to leave, Christopher paused at the door, looking back at the family he had never known he had. "Laura, I know I have no right to ask this, but could you forgive me? Could you ever forgive me for what I did to you?" Laura looked at this man who had once been the center of her universe, who had broken her heart so completely that she had thought she would never recover. The answer to his question was complex, involving 15 years of healing and growth that had transformed her from a devastated young woman into a strong, independent mother. "I forgave you years ago," she said quietly. "I had to, for my own peace of mind. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean that we can just pick up where we left off." Christopher nodded, understanding implicit in his expression. "I know. I just wanted you to know that I am not the same person who hurt you. I want to prove that I can be better." After he left, Laura sat with her sons in the quiet living room, all three of them processing the morning's revelations. The media circus outside continued, but it seemed distant and unimportant compared to the emotional upheaval they had all experienced. "Mom," Alex said finally, "do you think he really has changed?" "I do not know," Laura said honestly. "But I think we owe it to ourselves to find out." 3 days later, Laura found herself sitting in an upscale restaurant across from Christopher, watching him nervously adjust his napkin as they waited for Alex and Leo to return from the restroom. Their first official meeting as a family had been awkward but necessary, a careful attempt to establish some kind of normal interaction. "They are good boys," Christopher said, his voice filled with a pride that seemed both genuine and surprising. "You have done an amazing job raising them." "They raised themselves in many ways," Laura replied, though she appreciated the acknowledgement. "I just tried to provide them with stability and love." "You succeeded," Christopher said. "They are confident, intelligent, well-mannered. They are everything I would want my sons to be." The conversation was interrupted by the return of Alex and Leo, who slid into their seats with the casual energy of teenagers. Laura noticed how Christopher watched them, studying their movements and expressions as if trying to memorize every detail. "So," Leo said, cutting directly to the heart of the matter with typical teenage bluntness, "what happened with your wife?" Christopher's expression tightened slightly. "Amanda and I are taking some time apart while we figure out how to handle this situation." "You mean while she figures out whether she can accept that you have children?" Alex corrected, his perception sharp for a 15-year-old. "That is part of it," Christopher admitted, "but it is also about me figuring out what kind of man I want to be going forward." Laura felt a complex mixture of emotions at this revelation. Part of her felt guilty for destroying Christopher's marriage, while another part felt vindicated that his choices had consequences he could not simply ignore or buy his way out of. "Do you love her?" Leo asked, with the directness that only teenagers could manage. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "I thought I did, but I realized that what I felt for her was more like comfort than love. She represented the kind of life I thought I was supposed to want." "What kind of life do you actually want?" Alex asked, his tone more curious than challenging. Christopher looked across the table at Laura, his expression carrying a weight of emotion that made her heart race. "I want the life I threw away 15 years ago. I want the woman I never stopped loving and the children I never knew I had." The silence that followed his words was heavy with implication. Laura felt her carefully constructed emotional defenses beginning to crumble as she recognized the sincerity in his voice, the genuine regret and longing that he was no longer trying to hide. "It is not that simple," she said quietly. "You cannot just decide you want us back and expect everything to return to the way it was." "I know," Christopher said. "I know I have to earn the right to be part of your lives. I know I have to prove that I have changed, that I can be the man you deserved 15 years ago." "What about your wife?" Alex asked. "What about the life you built without us?" "Amanda will be fine," Christopher said, though Laura could hear the guilt in his voice. "She deserves someone who can love her completely, without reservation." I cannot be that person. Laura found herself thinking about the young woman whose wedding day she had inadvertently destroyed, wondering how she was coping with the revelation that her new husband's heart belonged to someone else. Despite everything, she felt sympathy for Amanda's situation. "This is not fair to her," Laura said. "She married you believing that you loved her." "You are right," Christopher agreed. "Which is why I am going to be honest with her about my feelings. She deserves the truth, even if it hurts." The waiter appeared to take their order, providing a welcome interruption to the emotionally charged conversation. Laura watched Christopher interact with their sons, noting how naturally he seemed to connect with them, despite the artificial circumstances of their relationship. "Do you play any sports?" Christopher asked as they waited for their food. "Soccer," Alex replied, "and Leo plays basketball." "I played soccer in college," Christopher said, his face lighting up with genuine enthusiasm. "Maybe we could kick a ball around sometime." "That would be cool," Leo said, and Laura could hear the cautious hope in his voice. As the meal progressed, Laura found herself relaxing slightly, allowing herself to imagine what it might be like if Christopher truly had changed, if he could become the father her sons deserved and the partner she had once believed him to be. But the fantasy was interrupted by the buzz of Christopher's phone, which he glanced at and immediately frowned. "Amanda?" Laura asked. "My lawyer," Christopher replied, his expression growing serious. "I need to take this." He stepped away from the table, and Laura watched through the restaurant window as he paced on the sidewalk, his conversation animated and clearly stressful. "He looks upset," Alex observed. "Probably dealing with the divorce," Leo said with a matter-of-fact tone that reminded Laura how much her sons had absorbed from this complicated situation. When Christopher returned to the table, his expression was grim. "We need to talk," he said to Laura. "Privately?" Laura felt a chill of apprehension at his tone. "What is wrong?" "Amanda's family has hired a very expensive legal team," Christopher said quietly. "They are claiming that our marriage was obtained under false pretenses, that I committed fraud by not disclosing the existence of my children. Can they do that?" Alex asked, his concern evident. "They can try," Christopher replied. "But more importantly, they are threatening to sue Laura for intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming that her revelation at the wedding was a calculated attack designed to destroy Amanda's marriage." Laura felt the blood drain from her face as she processed this information. She had never considered that her actions at the wedding could result in legal consequences, that her moment of truth-telling could be twisted into something malicious. "That is ridiculous," Leo said indignantly. "Mom did not even know it was his wedding when she took the job." "I know that, and you know that," Christopher said. "But Amanda's family has significant resources and influence. They can make this very difficult and expensive, even if they ultimately lose." Laura felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. She had spent 15 years building a stable, peaceful life for her sons, and now that stability was being threatened by forces beyond her control. "What do we do?" she asked. Christopher reached across the table and took her hand, his touch sending an unexpected jolt of electricity through her system. "We fight back, we tell the truth, and we do not let them intimidate us." "Easy for you to say," Laura replied, though she did not pull her hand away. "You have money and lawyers. I have a small business and 2 children to protect. You have me," Christopher said, his voice carrying a conviction that made her heart skip a beat. "You have me, and I will not let anyone hurt you or the boys. Not again." The promise in his voice was both comforting and terrifying. Laura realized that accepting Christopher's protection would mean accepting him back into their lives in a way that would change everything for their small family. But as she looked at her sons, seeing the anxiety and confusion in their faces, she knew that she would do whatever was necessary to protect them, even if it meant trusting the man who had once broken her heart so completely. The legal battle that followed consumed the next several weeks, transforming Laura's quiet life into a media circus of depositions, court filings, and strategic meetings with lawyers. Christopher had hired the best legal team money could buy, but the process was still exhausting and emotionally draining for everyone involved. "This is insane," Laura said, pacing around Christopher's downtown office, while Alex and Leo sat in the reception area with a pile of homework. "They are trying to make it sound like I deliberately set out to destroy that poor girl's wedding." "Amanda is not a poor girl," Christopher replied, though his tone was gentle. "She is a grown woman who married a man she barely knew for his money and social position. This legal action is her family's attempt to salvage their investment." Laura stopped pacing and stared at him. "Is that really what you think? That she married you for money?" Christopher was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I think Amanda thought she loved me. But I also think she was in love with the idea of being married to Christopher Moore, heir to the Moore fortune. She was not in love with me as a person." "How can you be so sure?" Laura asked, "because when she found out about you and the boys, her first concern was not about my deception or the pain I had caused you. Her first concern was about how this would affect her social standing, her family's business relationships, her future financial security." Laura felt a pang of sympathy for Amanda despite everything. Maybe that was just her way of processing the shock. "Maybe," Christopher agreed, "but the woman I thought I loved would have been more concerned about the welfare of my children than about the damage to her reputation." The conversation was interrupted by Christopher's assistant, who knocked on the office door with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Mr. Moore, I have Amanda Richmond's attorney on line 1. He says it is urgent." Christopher and Laura exchanged glances before he picked up the phone. "This is Christopher Moore." Laura could not hear the other side of the conversation, but she could see Christopher's expression changing from wariness to surprise to something approaching relief. "Are you certain about this?" Christopher asked. "Yes, I understand. No, we will not be making any public statements at this time." "Thank you." He hung up the phone and turned to Laura with a smile that was both triumphant and exhausted. "Amanda is dropping the lawsuit," he said. "She is also agreeing to an annulment rather than a divorce, which means our marriage will be declared null and void." "Why the sudden change of heart?" Laura asked, though she felt a surge of relief at the news. "Apparently, the media attention has not been favorable to her family," Christopher explained. "The public sympathy is entirely on your side, and their legal strategy was making them look vindictive and greedy." Laura sank into a chair, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to leave her body. "So it is over." "The legal part is over," Christopher confirmed, "but the rest of it, the important part, is just beginning." He moved around the desk and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Laura felt her heart racing at his proximity, at the intensity in his eyes. "Laura, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that there is no wrong answer. Whatever you decide, I will respect it and support it." "What is it?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew what he was going to say. "I want to ask if you would consider giving me another chance. Not just as a father to Alex and Leo, but as the man who loves you, who has never stopped loving you, who wants to spend the rest of his life making up for the mistakes he made when he was too young and stupid to appreciate what he had." Laura stared at him, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, the genuine emotion that he was no longer trying to hide. This was the conversation she had both dreaded and longed for. The moment when she would have to decide whether to risk her heart again with the man who had once shattered it so completely. "Christopher," she said quietly, "I do not know if I can trust you with my heart again. I do not know if I can risk the boys getting attached to you only to have you leave when things get difficult." "I will never leave you again," Christopher said, his voice carrying a conviction that made her breath catch. "I will never abandon you or the boys, no matter what happens. I swear to you, on everything that matters to me, that I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve your love." Before Laura could respond, the office door burst open and Alex and Leo tumbled in, their faces flushed with excitement. "Mom, there are news trucks outside saying that the lawsuit is over," Alex said breathlessly. "Is it true? Are we free?" "Yes," Laura said, pulling both boys into a hug. "It is over. We are free." "Does this mean we can go back to our normal lives?" Leo asked. Laura looked at Christopher, who was watching the three of them with an expression of such love and longing that it took her breath away. Normal was no longer an option, she realized. Their lives had been irrevocably changed by the events of the past month, and there was no going back to the way things had been. The question now was what kind of future they would build together, and whether she had the courage to risk everything on the possibility that Christopher Moore had truly changed, that he could be the man she had once believed him to be. "I do not know what normal looks like anymore," she said honestly. "But I think we are about to find out." As the afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, Laura realized that they were standing at a crossroads that would determine the rest of their lives. The legal battle was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. Learning to trust again, learning to love again, learning to build a family from the pieces of their broken past. Christopher stood and pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her arms. "Take all the time you need to decide," he said. "I will be here waiting for you for as long as it takes." Laura looked into his eyes and saw the man she had fallen in love with 15 years ago. Older and wiser, but still capable of making her heart race with a single touch. The future was uncertain, filled with risks and possibilities in equal measure. But for the first time in 15 years, Laura Martinez allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, some things were worth the risk of heartbreak. 6 weeks after the annulment was finalized, Laura found herself standing in her kitchen on a Saturday morning, watching through the window as Christopher taught Alex and Leo how to change the oil in her Honda Pilot. The sight of the three of them working together, their heads bent over the engine, created an ache in her chest that she was still learning to identify. "Hand me that wrench," Christopher said, his voice carrying clearly through the open garage door. "The one with the blue handle." "This one?" Leo asked, holding up the tool with the eager helpfulness of a teenager trying to impress his father. "Perfect," Christopher replied, and Laura could hear the genuine pride in his voice. "You are getting good at this." Alex appeared at Christopher's elbow, his face smudged with grease but glowing with satisfaction. "Mom is going to be so surprised when she sees how clean the engine bay looks." Laura smiled despite herself, remembering how she had struggled with car maintenance over the years, taking the Honda to overpriced service stations because she had never learned to do the work herself. Christopher's presence had brought an unexpected practical benefit to their household, though she was careful not to let herself become dependent on his help. The past 6 weeks had been a careful dance of boundaries and possibilities, of Christopher proving himself worthy of trust, while Laura guarded her heart against the possibility of another devastating betrayal. He had been patient and consistent, showing up for the boys' soccer games and school events, taking them to movies and baseball games, slowly building the relationship he had missed for the first 15 years of their lives. "Mom, come see what we did," Alex called, having spotted her at the window. Laura walked outside, noting how naturally Christopher fit into the domestic scene, his expensive clothes exchanged for old jeans and a t-shirt that made him look younger and more approachable than the successful businessman she had confronted at his wedding. "Very impressive," she said, examining the clean engine bay. "How much do I owe you for the service?" "Just a home-cooked meal," Christopher replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "I have been living on takeout for weeks." The request was casual, but Laura recognized the deeper meaning behind it. Christopher was asking for inclusion in the intimate rituals of their family life, for the chance to sit around their dinner table and be part of the ordinary moments that had defined their existence without him. "I suppose I could manage that," Laura said, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the prospect. "Nothing fancy, though, just regular family dinner." "That sounds perfect," Christopher said, his smile carrying a warmth that made her heart skip. "Regular family dinner is exactly what I want." As they cleaned up the garage, Laura found herself watching Christopher interact with the boys, noting how he had learned their individual personalities and preferences over the past weeks. He knew that Alex was more serious and thoughtful, that Leo was the entertainer who used humor to navigate difficult situations. He had adapted his parenting style to meet each boy where they were, never trying to force an intimacy that had to be earned. "Can we show him the treehouse?" Leo asked, his enthusiasm bubbling over. "If he wants to see it," Laura replied, though she felt a pang of vulnerability at the thought of Christopher seeing the backyard fort she had helped the boys build when they were younger. "I would love to see it," Christopher said, and Laura could tell he meant it. They made their way to the backyard, where a modest but well-constructed treehouse occupied the branches of an old oak tree. Laura had built it with her own hands during the summer when the boys were 10, determined to give them the kind of childhood adventure space that required no father's involvement. "Mom built this herself," Alex said proudly, scrambling up the rope ladder. "She watched YouTube videos and learned how to use power tools." Christopher looked at Laura with an expression of admiration and something deeper that made her cheeks flush. "You built this." "It was not that complicated," Laura said, deflecting the compliment. "Just basic carpentry." "It is amazing," Christopher said, testing the stability of the ladder before following the boys up into the small structure. "You can see the whole neighborhood from up here." Laura climbed up after him, feeling slightly ridiculous as a 35-year-old woman squeezing into a space designed for children. But the treehouse felt different with Christopher there, more complete somehow, as if it had always been waiting for a father's presence to make it truly a family space. "We used to camp out here sometimes," Leo said, pointing to the corner where sleeping bags could be rolled out. "Mom would let us sleep outside if we promised to come in if it started raining." "That sounds like the perfect childhood memory," Christopher said, looking at Laura with an expression that made her breath catch. "You gave them everything they needed." "I did my best," Laura replied, though she felt a familiar pang of guilt about the father-shaped hole in her sons' lives. "It was not always easy." "You should not have had to do it alone," Christopher said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of regret. "They should have had a father who was there for the treehouse building and the camping trips and all the ordinary moments." The conversation was interrupted by Leo's stomach growling loudly, which made everyone laugh and broke the tension that had been building between the adults. "I think that is our signal to start dinner," Laura said, grateful for the reprieve. As they climbed down from the treehouse, Laura found herself thinking about the careful balance she had been trying to maintain. She wanted to protect her sons from the possibility of disappointment if Christopher's commitment wavered, but she also wanted to give them the chance to know their father. The contradiction was exhausting, requiring constant vigilance and emotional management. "What can I do to help with dinner?" Christopher asked as they walked back toward the house. "You can set the table," Laura replied, then caught herself. "If you want to. You do not have to." "I want to," Christopher said, his voice carrying a sincerity that made her heart ache. "I want to be part of this, Laura, all of it." As they prepared dinner together, Laura was struck by how naturally Christopher fit into the rhythm of their household. He seemed to understand instinctively where things belonged, how to navigate around her in the kitchen, how to engage the boys in conversation without dominating the space. "How was school this week?" he asked Alex, who was setting out napkins. "Pretty good," Alex replied. "We started a new unit in history about the Great Depression. It is actually really interesting." "I wrote a paper about that period in college," Christopher said. "The economic policies of the time were fascinating, especially the way they affected different social classes." Laura listened to the conversation with a mixture of pride and pain. Her sons were intelligent and curious, ready to engage with adult ideas and perspectives. Christopher's presence brought a different kind of intellectual stimulation to their dinner table, the kind of academic discussion that she had always tried to provide, but that felt more natural coming from someone with his educational background. "Mom, is the pasta ready?" Leo asked, peering into the pot of boiling water. "Almost," Laura replied, testing a piece. 2 more minutes." As she drained the pasta and assembled the simple meal she had prepared, Laura felt Christopher's presence behind her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth of his body. The proximity was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder of the physical attraction that had never completely faded, despite 15 years of separation. "This smells amazing," he said, his voice low and intimate. "I had forgotten how good home cooking could be." Laura turned around, intending to ask him to move so she could get to the serving dishes, but found herself trapped between his body and the counter. For a moment, they stood frozen, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Laura," he said quietly, his hand rising to touch her cheek. Before she could respond, Alex's voice cut through the moment. "Are we eating or what? I'm starving." Christopher stepped back immediately, his face flushed with embarrassment at being caught in an intimate moment by his son. Laura felt her own cheeks burning as she busied herself with serving the food, trying to ignore the electricity that had passed between them. Dinner was a success, despite the awkward moment, with conversation flowing easily between the 4 of them. Laura found herself relaxing into the domestic scene, allowing herself to imagine what it would be like if this were their normal life, if Christopher were truly part of their family rather than a visitor trying to earn his place. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Christopher said as he helped clear the dishes. "Thank you for including me." "You are welcome," Laura replied, though she felt the weight of the decision she knew she would have to make soon. Christopher's presence in their lives was no longer temporary or casual. He was becoming integrated into their family routines, and the boys were becoming attached to him in ways that would make his absence devastating if he chose to leave. As Christopher prepared to go home, Alex and Leo hugged him goodbye with the easy affection of children who had never doubted their father's love. Laura watched the exchange with a mixture of joy and terror, knowing that her sons were giving their hearts to a man who had already broken them once by his absence. "Thank you for today," Christopher said to Laura as they stood on the front porch. "For the dinner, for letting me be part of this. Thank you for helping with the car," Laura replied, though she felt the inadequacy of the polite exchange given the emotional weight of the day. Christopher hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something more, then leaned down and kissed her cheek gently. "Good night, Laura." The brief contact sent a shock through her system, a reminder of the physical chemistry that had always existed between them. As she watched him walk to his car, Laura realized that she was falling in love with him again, despite all her careful defenses and rational objections. The question was whether she had the courage to admit it, and whether Christopher Moore was truly worth the risk of another broken heart. 2 weeks later, Laura found herself in the emergency room at Riverside General Hospital, her heart pounding with fear as she waited for news about Leo's condition. The accident had happened so quickly, a collision during soccer practice that had left her younger son unconscious on the field. Mrs. Martinez. A doctor in scrubs approached her, his expression professionally neutral but reassuring. Your son has a mild concussion and a dislocated shoulder, but he is going to be fine. We want to keep him overnight for observation, but there should not be any lasting effects. Laura felt her knees buckle with relief, the adrenaline that had been keeping her upright suddenly draining away. Can I see him? Of course, the doctor replied. He is awake and asking for you. As Laura followed the doctor toward Leo's room, she was surprised to see Christopher sitting in the waiting area, his face pale with worry. He stood immediately when he saw her, his concern evident in every line of his body. How is he? Christopher asked, his voice rough with emotion. He is going to be fine, Laura said, though she felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. Mild concussion and a dislocated shoulder. Christopher pulled her into his arms without hesitation, holding her as she finally allowed herself to break down. The fear and stress of the past hour overwhelmed her, and she sobbed against his chest as he murmured reassurances and stroked her hair. I got here as fast as I could, he said when her tears had subsided. Alex called me from the school. I was in a meeting, but I left immediately. Laura pulled back to look at him, noting the expensive suit that was now wrinkled from holding her, the tie that had been loosened in his haste to reach the hospital. You did not have to come. Yes, I did, Christopher said firmly. He is my son, and you are... He stopped, as if catching himself before saying something he was not ready to voice. I am what? Laura asked, though she was not sure she was ready to hear his answer. You are the woman I love, Christopher said simply. You are the mother of my children, and when you hurt, I hurt. When you are scared, I am scared. I could not be anywhere else. Before Laura could respond, Alex appeared at her elbow, his face drawn with worry. Mom, is Leo okay? The coach would not tell me anything. He is going to be fine, Laura said, pulling her older son into a hug. We can see him now. The three of them made their way to Leo's room, where they found the injured teenager sitting up in bed, his left arm in a sling, but his spirits remarkably high given the circumstances. Hey, family, Leo said with a grin that was only slightly diminished by the large bandage on his forehead. I look pretty tough, right? You look like you got hit by a truck, Alex said, but his relief was evident in his voice. How are you feeling? Christopher asked, moving to the bedside with the natural concern of a father. Like I have been hit by a truck, Leo admitted, but the nurses are really nice and they said I can have ice cream for dinner. Laura watched Christopher interact with Leo, noting how naturally he had assumed the role of concerned parent. There was no awkwardness or uncertainty in his manner, just genuine love and worry for his injured son. The doctor said you have to stay overnight, Laura said, smoothing Leo's hair away from his bandage, just for observation. Can you stay with me? Leo asked, his bravado slipping slightly to reveal the scared 15-year-old beneath. Of course, Laura said immediately. I will be right here. What about work tomorrow? Christopher asked. Do you have any appointments scheduled? Laura felt a flash of panic as she realized she had completely forgotten about her professional obligations. I have a consultation with the Hendersons at 10 and a site visit at 2. I can handle those for you, Christopher said without hesitation. I can call them and reschedule, or if you want, I can meet with them myself and take notes for you. You do not know anything about interior design, Laura protested. I know about architecture and space planning, Christopher replied. And I know how to take detailed notes. I can be your eyes and ears until you are available to follow up." The offer was both practical and deeply touching, a demonstration of Christopher's commitment to supporting her in whatever way she needed. Laura felt another crack in the wall she had built around her heart, another moment of recognition that this man was truly trying to be the partner she had always needed. "That would be incredibly helpful," she admitted. "Thank you." As the evening progressed, Christopher proved his commitment by staying at the hospital until visiting hours ended, helping to keep Leo entertained and ensuring that Laura had everything she needed. He brought coffee and sandwiches, handled phone calls from concerned friends and family, and generally served as the kind of support system that Laura had never had during the boy's childhood. "You should go home and get some rest," Laura said, as the nurses prepared to dim the lights for the night. "You have work tomorrow." "So do you," Christopher pointed out, "and you are going to be here all night with Leo." "I am his mother," Laura said. "This is what mothers do." "And I am his father," Christopher replied. "This is what fathers do too." The simple statement carried such weight that Laura felt tears prick her eyes again. For 15 years, she had handled every crisis alone, every emergency room visit and sick day and middle-of-the-night worry. The idea of sharing that responsibility, of having a true partner in the challenges of parenthood, was both appealing and terrifying. "I will be back first thing in the morning," Christopher said, kissing Leo's forehead gently. "Try to get some sleep and call me if you need anything at all." "Thanks, Dad," Leo said, the words slipping out naturally and without self-consciousness. Laura saw Christopher's face transform at the sound of his son calling him Dad, the pure joy and love in his expression making her heart ache. This was what she had deprived them all of for 15 years, this natural family bond that should have been present from the beginning. After Christopher left, Laura settled into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Leo's bed, her mind racing with the events of the day. The accident had been a stark reminder of how quickly life could change, how precious and fragile their family happiness really was. "Mom," Leo said quietly in the darkness, "I'm glad Dad was here today." "Me too," Laura admitted, though the words felt like a significant confession. "Are you going to marry him?" Leo asked, with the bluntness of a teenager who had been through too much adult drama to bother with subtlety. Laura was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer. "I do not know," she said finally. "It is complicated." "Do you love him?" Leo pressed. "Yes," Laura said, the admission surprising her with its clarity. "I never stopped loving him." "Then what is complicated about it?" Leo asked, his logic unassailable in the way that only teenage logic could be. Laura smiled in the darkness, recognizing the truth in her son's simple question. The complications were all in her head, all based on fear and past hurt rather than present reality. Christopher had proven himself over and over again in the past few months, had shown her that he was no longer the selfish young man who had broken her heart. "Maybe nothing is complicated about it," she said softly. "Maybe I have just been too scared to admit how much I want him back in our lives." "He is already back in our lives, Mom," Leo said, with the wisdom of a child who had always been more perceptive than his years. "The question is whether you're going to let yourself be happy about it." As Laura listened to her son's breathing slow into sleep, she realized that he was right. Christopher had already proven himself worthy of their trust and love. The only thing standing in the way of their happiness was her own fear of being vulnerable again. The next morning would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but for the first time in 15 years, Laura Martinez allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved the kind of love that Christopher Moore was offering her. Christopher arrived at the hospital the next morning, carrying coffee, fresh flowers, and a bag of Leo's favorite breakfast pastries from the bakery downtown. Laura watched him navigate the hospital corridors with the confidence of someone who belonged there, who had earned the right to be part of their family's most vulnerable moments. "How did he sleep?" Christopher asked, setting down his offerings and immediately checking Leo's chart with the focused attention of a concerned parent. "Better than I did," Laura admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The chair is not exactly designed for comfort. Next time I will bring a sleeping bag," Christopher said, then caught himself. "I mean, if there is a next time. I hope there is not a next time." Laura felt a warmth spread through her chest at his automatic assumption that he would be there for future emergencies, that his presence in their lives was permanent rather than temporary. "Thank you for coming so early." "I wanted to be here when the doctor made rounds," Christopher said, "and I wanted to make sure you had eaten something." Leo was discharged later that morning with strict instructions to rest for the next few days and avoid any strenuous activity. Christopher insisted on driving them home, his expensive sedan carefully navigating the familiar streets of their neighborhood. "Can I stay home from school tomorrow?" Leo asked hopefully as they pulled into the driveway. "We will see how you feel," Laura replied, though she was already mentally rearranging her schedule to accommodate Leo's recovery. "I can work from home for the next few days," Christopher offered. "That way, someone will be here with him while you handle your appointments." The offer was both practical and presumptuous, assuming a level of integration into their household that they had not formally established. Laura felt a flutter of panic at the thought of Christopher essentially moving in, even temporarily. "You do not have to do that," she said carefully. "I can manage." "I know you can manage," Christopher replied, parking the car and turning to face her. "You have been managing alone for 15 years, but you do not have to anymore." The conversation was interrupted by Leo's attempt to get out of the car, which was complicated by his sling and the lingering effects of his concussion. Christopher immediately moved to help him, his movements gentle and sure as he supported his injured son. "Easy," Christopher said. "Take your time." Laura watched the interaction between father and son, noting how natural their relationship had become over the past few months. Leo leaned into Christopher's support without hesitation, trusting him completely to provide the help he needed. Once they were settled in the living room, Christopher surprised Laura by efficiently organizing Leo's recovery space, arranging pillows and blankets, setting up a side table with water and snacks, and positioning the television remote within easy reach. "You are good at this," Laura observed, settling into the armchair across from the couch where Leo was stretched out. "I have been reading parenting books," Christopher admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly. "Trying to catch up on 15 years of missed experience." The confession was both touching and heartbreaking, a reminder of all the learning and growing that Christopher had been forced to compress into a few short months. Laura felt another crack in her defensive wall, another moment of recognition that this man was truly committed to being the father her sons deserved. "What kind of parenting books?" Leo asked, his curiosity overcoming his need to appear too cool for such discussions. "Everything," Christopher said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Books about teenagers, books about discipline, books about communication. I even read a book about how to talk to your kids about dating." "Oh, God," Alex said, appearing in the doorway with a look of horror. "Please tell me you are not going to try to have the talk with us. Your mother and I will figure out how to handle those conversations," Christopher said, his tone becoming more serious. "But yes, I want to be involved in every aspect of your lives going forward." Laura felt her heart skip at the casual way Christopher had referred to them as a unit, as if their co-parenting relationship was already established and permanent. The assumption was both thrilling and terrifying. "I should get to work," she said, standing and gathering her purse. "I have that consultation with the Hendersons and then the site visit." "Call me if you need anything," Christopher said, his attention already focused on ensuring Leo's comfort. "We will be fine here." As Laura drove to her first appointment, she found herself thinking about the scene she had just left, Christopher caring for Leo with the natural ease of an experienced father, Alex hovering nearby with the protective instincts of an older brother, all three of them creating a family dynamic that felt both new and inevitable. The Henderson consultation went smoothly, though Laura found herself distracted by thoughts of home and the man who was currently occupying her living room. She had become accustomed to managing every aspect of her son's lives alone, and the idea of sharing that responsibility was both liberating and anxiety-provoking. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Christopher. "Leo is napping. Alex is doing homework. House is quiet. Hope your appointments are going well." The message was simple and domestic, but it filled Laura with a sense of security she had not experienced in 15 years. Someone was watching over her children, someone who cared about them as much as she did, someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with being a parent. The site visit was more challenging, requiring Laura to climb ladders and take measurements in a house that was being renovated. She found herself thinking about how much easier the job would be with an assistant, someone who could hold the other end of the measuring tape and help her document the existing conditions. Another text from Christopher. "Leo is asking for your famous grilled cheese sandwiches. Should I attempt to make them or wait for you to get home?" Laura smiled as she typed back, "Butter both sides of the bread, medium heat." "Do not rush it." His response came quickly. "Instructions received, wish me luck." 20 minutes later, another message arrived with a photo of 2 perfectly golden grilled cheese sandwiches on a plate. "Success. Leo says they are almost as good as yours." Laura felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction and everything to do with the man who was learning to care for her children with the same attention to detail that she had always provided. When she arrived home that evening, she found Christopher in the kitchen cleaning up the dinner dishes while Alex and Leo played video games in the living room. The scene was so domestic, so naturally familial, that Laura had to pause in the doorway to absorb the reality of it. "How did it go today?" she asked, setting down her purse and portfolio. "Better than I expected," Christopher replied, drying his hands on a dish towel. "Leo slept most of the afternoon, and Alex helped me figure out how to work the television remote." "The television remote is not that complicated," Laura said with amusement. "It is when you are nervous about breaking something that belongs to someone else," Christopher admitted. "I kept thinking about how this is your house, your space, your family routine. I did not want to overstep." Laura looked at this man who had once been the center of her universe, who had broken her heart so completely that she had thought she would never recover. Now he was standing in her kitchen, worried about overstepping boundaries while caring for their injured son. "Christopher," she said quietly, "this is your family too. This is your home too, if you want it to be." The words were out before she could stop them, a confession that surprised her as much as it surprised him. Christopher stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from surprise to hope to something deeper that made her heart race. "Do you mean that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Laura said, taking a step closer to him. "I mean it. I love you, Christopher. I never stopped loving you, and I am tired of pretending that I do not want you in our lives permanently." Christopher closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with 15 years of pent-up longing and regret. Laura melted into the kiss, feeling all her carefully constructed defenses crumble as she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could have the happy ending she had stopped believing was possible. "I love you too," Christopher murmured against her lips. "I have loved you every day for 15 years, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life." The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent as they both acknowledged the feelings they had been fighting for months. Laura felt herself drowning in the sensation of being held by the man she had never stopped wanting, the father of her children, the love of her life who had finally found his way back to her. "Mom, are you kissing Dad?" Leo's voice cut through the moment, filled with teenage amusement and satisfaction. Laura and Christopher broke apart, both of them laughing at being caught by their son. "Yes," Laura said, not bothering to hide her happiness. "I am kissing your father." "It is about time," Alex said, appearing behind his brother with a grin. "We were wondering how long it was going to take you guys to figure it out." Christopher looked at his sons, then at Laura, his expression filled with wonder and gratitude. "So this is okay with you, all of this?" "Dad," Leo said, rolling his eyes with exaggerated patience, "we have been waiting for you to propose to Mom for weeks. What is taking you so long?" The proposal came 3 weeks later, though not in the way Laura had expected. She was working late in her home office, reviewing plans for a new project, when she heard Christopher's voice in the living room, talking quietly with Alex and Leo. "I want to do this right," he was saying. "I want to ask her properly, but I need to know that you are both okay with it." Laura felt her heart stop as she realized what conversation was taking place without her knowledge. She crept closer to the doorway, knowing she should announce her presence, but unable to resist the urge to eavesdrop. "We have been okay with it since the day we met you," Alex said, his voice carrying the mature tone he used when discussing serious matters. "Mom has been happier in the past few months than she has been in years." "But this is a big change," Christopher said. "If she says yes, I will be moving in permanently. I will be part of your daily lives in a way that I have not been before." "Good," Leo said simply. "We want you here. We want to be a real family." Laura felt tears prick her eyes at her son's words, at the simple acceptance and love in his voice. She had spent 15 years worrying about whether her children would feel incomplete without a father, and now she was discovering that they had been waiting for this moment as eagerly as she had been fighting it. "There is something else," Christopher said, his voice becoming more serious. "I want to legally adopt you both. I want to make sure that you are my sons in every way that matters, not just biologically." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Laura could imagine her sons processing this unexpected offer, understanding the significance of what Christopher was proposing. "What would that mean?" Alex asked quietly. "It would mean that I am your father legally, as well as emotionally," Christopher explained. "It would mean that you would inherit from me, that you would have all the rights and protections that come with being my legal children. It would mean that nothing could ever separate us again." "What about our names?" Leo asked. "Would we become Moors?" "That would be up to you," Christopher said. "You could keep Martinez, or you could become Martinez Moore, or you could choose Moore, whatever feels right to you." Laura felt overwhelmed by the generosity and thoughtfulness of Christopher's proposal. He was not just asking to marry her, he was asking to become their family in the most complete and permanent way possible. "I think we should be Martinez Moore," Alex said after a long moment. "That way we honor both our parents." "I like that," Leo agreed. "Alex and Leo Martinez Moore. It sounds important." "You are important," Christopher said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are the most important thing in the world to me, both of you, you and your mother." Laura decided she had heard enough. She walked into the living room, not bothering to pretend she had not been listening. "I think it sounds important too." 3 heads turned toward her, expressions ranging from surprise to embarrassment to anticipation. Christopher stood immediately, his face flushing as he realized she had overheard his conversation with the boys. "Laura, I was going to talk to you first," he began, but she cut him off with a kiss that was both passionate and tender. "The answer is yes," she said against his lips. "Yes to the proposal you have not asked yet. Yes to the adoption. Yes to everything." Christopher pulled back to look at her, his expression filled with wonder and disbelief. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," Laura said, reaching for Alex and Leo and pulling them into the embrace. "We are going to be a family, a real, legal, permanent family." The boys cheered, their excitement echoing through the house as they realized that their long-held dream was finally coming true. Laura felt Christopher's arms tighten around all of them, creating a circle of love and belonging that she had never thought possible. "I do not have a ring yet," Christopher said, laughing as he tried to hold all 3 of them at once. "I was going to buy one after I talked to the boys." "I do not need a ring," Laura said, though she was touched by his consideration. "I just need you." "You are getting a ring," Christopher said firmly. "You are getting the most beautiful ring I can find, and you are getting the wedding you deserve, and you are getting everything I should have given you 15 years ago." "I just want you," Laura repeated, kissing him again. "Everything else is just details." As they stood together in the living room where they had spent so many evenings getting to know each other again, Laura felt the last of her reservations disappear. Christopher Moore was not the same man who had broken her heart 15 years ago. He was better, stronger, more mature, and more committed to their family than she had ever dared to hope. "When do you want to get married?" Christopher asked, his arms still around her waist. "Tomorrow," Laura said impulsively, then laughed at her own eagerness. "But I suppose we should plan something that includes our family and friends." "What about Christmas?" Alex suggested. "That way we can celebrate our new family and the holiday at the same time. Christmas is only 6 weeks away," Laura said, though the idea appealed to her. "That is not much time to plan a wedding." "We do not need a big wedding," Christopher said. "We just need the people who matter most to us, and we need each other." "Can we have it here?" Leo asked. "In our backyard. That way it feels like home." Laura looked around the living room that had witnessed so many important moments in their family's history. Then out toward the backyard where the boys had played for years under the watchful branches of the oak tree. The idea of getting married in their own space, surrounded by the memories they had created together, felt perfect. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said, feeling the rightness of the decision settle into her bones. "A Christmas wedding in our backyard with our family and friends." Christopher kissed her forehead, his expression filled with love and gratitude. "I promise you, Laura, this time I will get it right. This time I will be the husband you deserve and the father our sons need." "You already are," Laura said, meaning every word. "You already are." As the evening progressed into night, they sat together on the couch making plans for their future, their wedding, their life as a complete family. Laura felt a sense of peace and completion that she had not experienced since she was 20 years old, and believed that love could conquer everything. Now at 35, she knew that love was more complicated than she had once believed, but she also knew that it was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth believing in even when it seemed impossible. Christopher Moore had come back to her a changed man, and she had learned to love him with the wisdom and strength that came from 15 years of growth and independence. Together, They were going to build something beautiful and lasting, a family that could weather any storm because it was founded on truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that only grew stronger with time. Christmas morning dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of California winter weather that made outdoor celebrations possible. Laura stood at her bedroom window, watching Christopher and the boys string lights around the oak tree in preparation for the ceremony that would take place in just a few hours. "Mom, you need to come away from the window," her sister Patricia said, appearing at her elbow with a cup of coffee. "The groom is not supposed to see the bride before the wedding." "That is an old superstition," Laura replied, though she accepted the coffee gratefully. "Besides, Christopher and I have been living together for the past month. We see each other every morning." "This is different," Patricia insisted, pulling Laura away from the window. "This is your wedding day. Everything should be special and magical." Laura smiled at her sister's romantic enthusiasm, appreciating the way Patricia had thrown herself into the wedding preparations with the energy of someone who had been waiting years for this moment. The guest list was small but meaningful, including only the people who mattered most to their family. "Is Mom here yet?" Laura asked, checking the time on her phone. "She arrived 20 minutes ago and immediately started rearranging the flowers," Patricia said with amusement. "She says you do not have enough white roses." "I have plenty of white roses," Laura said, though she felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of her mother's perfectionist tendencies taking over her wedding day. "She is just excited," Patricia said gently. "We all are. You look beautiful, by the way." Laura glanced at herself in the full-length mirror, noting the simple but elegant dress she had chosen for the occasion. It was ivory silk, knee-length, with delicate lace sleeves that struck the right balance between bridal and age-appropriate. She had wanted to look like herself, not like she was trying to recapture the youth she had lost 15 years ago. "I feel beautiful," Laura said, surprising herself with the admission. "I feel like myself, but better." "That is what love does," Patricia said, adjusting Laura's hair one final time. "It makes you the best version of yourself." The next hour passed in a blur of final preparations, greeting guests and managing the nervous energy that always accompanied weddings. Laura found herself checking on details that Christopher had already handled, straightening flowers that were already perfect, and generally trying to channel her anxiety into productive activity. "Laura, you need to relax," her mother said, appearing with a glass of champagne. "Everything is perfect. The backyard looks like something from a magazine." Laura accepted the champagne and took a sip, feeling the bubbles help calm her nerves. Through the window, she could see guests beginning to take their seats on the folding chairs that had been arranged in neat rows facing the oak tree. The setting was intimate and personal, exactly what she had wanted. "5 minutes," Patricia announced, bustling into the room with the efficiency of a professional wedding coordinator. "The boys are in position, Christopher is at the altar, and the guests are seated." Laura felt her heart rate increase as the reality of the moment hit her. In 5 minutes, she would walk down the aisle and marry the man she had loved for most of her adult life, the father of her children, the person who had broken her heart and then spent months proving that he deserved a second chance. "Are you ready?" Patricia asked, offering her arm for the walk to the backyard. "I have been ready for 15 years, Laura said, taking a deep breath and picking up her bouquet of white roses and peonies. "Let us do this." The backyard had been transformed into a magical winter wonderland, with white lights strung through the trees and elegant floral arrangements creating a romantic atmosphere. The guests rose as Laura appeared, but her attention was focused entirely on Christopher, who stood beneath the oak tree, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him. He was wearing a dark blue suit that complemented his eyes, his hair perfectly styled, his expression filled with love and anticipation as he watched her walk toward him. Alex and Leo stood beside him as his best men, both wearing matching suits and grins that lit up their faces. The ceremony was officiated by a family friend who had known Laura for years, a woman who understood the significance of this moment and the journey that had brought them to this point. The vows were traditional but personalized, reflecting the mature love that had brought them together. "Christopher," Laura said, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet backyard. 15 years ago, I thought I had lost you forever. I thought that love was something that happened to other people, something that I was not destined to experience again. But you came back to me, and you showed me that love is not about perfection. It is about forgiveness, growth, and the willingness to fight for what matters most." Christopher's eyes were bright with tears as he responded, "Laura, you are the strongest, most beautiful, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. You raised our sons to be the kind of men I am proud to call my children. You built a life of love and purpose despite everything I put you through. I promise you that I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of your love, your trust, and your forgiveness." The exchange of rings was simple but meaningful, with Christopher placing a band of diamonds and sapphires on Laura's finger, while she slipped a plain gold band onto his. The rings were symbols of their commitment, but the real bond between them was the family they had created together. "You may kiss your bride," the officiant announced, and Christopher did not hesitate to claim the kiss that sealed their union. The reception was a joyful celebration that lasted well into the evening, with dancing, toasts, and the kind of happiness that came from knowing that this was not just a wedding, but the beginning of a new chapter in their family's story. Laura found herself moving through the evening in a haze of contentment, accepting congratulations and good wishes, while never losing sight of the man who was now her husband. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Moore?" Christopher asked as they swayed together during their first dance as husband and wife. "It feels like coming home," Laura said, looking up into his eyes. "It feels like everything I have been waiting for my entire life." "I love you, Laura Moore," Christopher said, spinning her gently as the music swelled around them. "I love you too, Christopher Moore," Laura replied, feeling the rightness of their new names, their new identity as a married couple. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Laura stood with Christopher and their sons in the backyard that had been transformed for their wedding. The lights were still twinkling in the trees, the flowers were still beautiful, but the real magic was in the family they had finally become. "So what happens now?" Alex asked, his arm around his mother's waist. "Now we live happily ever after," Leo said with the confidence of a 16-year-old who believed that all problems could be solved with love and determination. "Now we go to bed," Christopher said practically, "because we have a honeymoon flight to catch tomorrow morning." 2 weeks in Italy, Laura said, still amazed by the extravagant gift Christopher had planned for them. "I have never been to Europe." "We have a lot of catching up to do," Christopher said, kissing her temple. 15 years of experiences to share, places to see, memories to make. As they cleaned up the backyard and prepared for bed, Laura felt a sense of completion that she had not experienced since she was 20 years old. She was no longer Laura Martinez, the single mother who had built a life from the ruins of her broken heart. She was Laura Moore, wife and mother, part of a complete family that had been worth waiting for. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and challenges, but also full of love and the kind of security that came from knowing that they would face whatever came together. Christopher had kept his promise to prove himself worthy of their love, and Laura had found the courage to risk her heart again. On Christmas night, as she fell asleep in her husband's arms, Laura Martinez Moore knew that some gifts were worth waiting for, and some love stories were worth fighting for, no matter how long it took to reach the happy ending. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.